Hi. Hello, my name is Thomas Beckwith. I'll be facilitating today's discussion with individuals who have been both in the two-year college system as well as in four-year institutions. Um, I currently work at the University of Florida as the Assistant Director of the Office of Academic Support. And joining us today, we have Dr. Tim Cox, Miss Kris Valentine, and Miss Shaura Thomas. Mr. Tim Cox, can you go ahead and Dr. Tim Cox, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me on. Thomas, it's been great working with you. Tim Cox, I am the Dean of Advising and Co-Curricular Programs at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, and I've been at Lafayette for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was at a four-year mid-sized public institution in the Mid-Atlantic. I also worked at a transfer receiving institution that was part of the same university system. And then prior to that, I worked at two different community colleges, one in an urban community college and a suburban community college. So I feel like I've had some experience kind of shifting between institutional types these past 15 years.
All right, Miss Kris Valentine, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Thomas. My name is Kris Valentine. I am an academic and career advisor, and I work for the Heber School of Business within the Warrington College of Business at the University of Florida. I've worked in higher ed for more than 17 years. So it's been a great experience. Lots of variety.
And we have our last participant on today's discussion, Miss Shaura Thomas.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shaura Thomas. I am a undergraduate chemical engineering academic advisor at the University of Florida. I have been there for a little over 3 years. And prior to that, I was at Santa Fe College as an advising specialist for 11 years.
All right, so we're just going to ask some questions about your experience within the two-year college environment as well as the four-year institution environment. All right, so one of the first questions I want to ask is, based on your experience in both two-year colleges and four-year institutions, what are the most significant differences in advising practices between these two environments?
I would say that coming from a two-year college is that advising is more frequent because you're focused on helping students through their initial stages of higher education. Whereas whenever you're going to a four-year university, it's more of a broader scope. So you're looking at the long-term academic planning, the research opportunities, preparation for graduate school, and any other kinds of specialized careers.
Yeah. Agreed. I would say that I kind of look at the mission and advising model as the key significant differences. And I'm looking at like more centralized for our community college, where there's more so a professional advising model versus a split or a faculty advising model at the four-year colleges and universities. And with that, I see difference between the frequent advising that Shara was talking about and like the high touch advising that you get at the community college versus around more periodic advising around registration, graduate school research opportunities for the four-year institutions. And we always say that advising is year-round, but I've definitely noticed the fact that with a more centralized or more professional model, students can access an advisor pretty much at any time.
I would agree with both of those perspectives as well, and just add that with the centralized model, which is what we utilize within the Warrington College of Business, it's very effective. But typically, from my experience from a two-year to a four-year, it's actually more of a decentralized model. And the reason why I say that is I feel like students more at the university level are looking, as Shara mentioned, just more specialty and more major focus compared to the two-year college, where, as Shara also mentioned, we're really helping those students get familiar with college and just learning about what college is and what it can provide them, and what the structure of college is with accessing their courses and what an academic plan is and things like that. So we're utilizing a lot of those types of things, where more in the four-year university we're helping them get more involved, helping them grow, being more independent, helping them with those leadership skills, etc. So I feel like all the things are kind of added into the university level compared more to the 2-year level, but they're both equally important because we're looking at different types of students in each model.
All right, my other question, just thinking about something that you all mentioned. Um, Thinking back, um, how has your advising style changed based on, the work that you did in the 2-year college versus now being in the 4-year environment? What does that look like for you all? Do you have a specific advising style, or when you think about student development theory or any things of that nature?
For me, whenever you're thinking about it from, say, a community college or a state college, it was more of a thinking about everyone as a whole, kind of almost a one size fits all, but not really in that sense. Whereas whenever you're thinking about a 4-year institution, it's more specialized because you're only thinking about that specific program. So for me, with my chemical engineering students, I only really need to know chemical engineering, whereas when I was at the state college, I had to know every single track of an advisement track. And so I think that that's the difference, is that in a state college, I feel like you're a jack of all trades and sometimes a master of none. Whereas whenever you're at the 4-year university, you can actually dive in and actually know the content of what you need to be able to prepare your students for better with the advising.
Ditto on that. I'm just thinking about on a philosophical aspect, my approach actually has remained the same. And to similar to Shara's point, it really is about advising the whole student here. And so in terms of them reaching their personal, educational, and professional goals, we're looking at all aspects of the student, what they're bringing into college, and kind of how they can make meaning of their education. And so I use an approach that I always seem to talk about in a lot of these advising podcast meetings, something called the intersubjective relative advising approach, where I try to think of my own experiences as a college student and working with my advisees. And this can be across age, it can be across, gender, it can be across, all types of identities about we share that common role as a student. And so I know what it's like to fail a test, right? I know what it's like to change a major. I know what it's like to drop a course. And so I'm able to kind of adjust accordingly when connecting with students across areas. And even if I don't have those same identities or have those same experiences, I work with students across those different areas at various institutions where I can figure out a way to kind of help students navigate college accordingly.
Yeah, and again, I would agree with all those perspectives as well. I think more for me, and Shara touched on this too, was the 2-year experience. I feel like you're really spending a lot more time with the student. And I typically use that Chickering's 7 vectors theory, just because all those things get added in, and they do at the university level as well. But you're really helping them develop that competence piece. You're really helping them with their emotions, helping them with their identity. There's a lot of different things and purpose, things like that. But really, just as an advisor, it's more, I feel like advising is teaching, and that's my philosophy. And it's not like they're just in my office for 10 minutes and that's it. I want to truly encourage them, help them know what my role is, what their role is as a student, and really help them evolve during their 2-year time at the community college. And then versus the 4-year college, same thing, but I use more of an emotional development or psychosocial development model, just because they're, as Shara also mentioned, it's more specialized, and they're really developing those leadership skills. They're focusing on career. They're more honed in on what is my next step after undergraduate coursework and things like that. So advising is definitely very different between the two models. They're both equally important. It's just, it's hard sometimes when you only have 10 minutes with a student, and what do you want to convey to them? So as everyone also mentioned too, just, developing, the holistic model with students is also very important. So just adding all those pieces is definitely part of my day-to-day advising.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that and probably ask a question to Shara and Kris. Where you all are you also advising junior and senior students, or do you have faculty that are advising these students?
So for me, I advise students from their second year all the way to graduation in my department. So when they're freshmen, they're actually advised by the College of Engineering, and then they transition over into my department.
Yeah, and for me, Tim, I'm more of all things. So I'm centralized. So we have freshmen all the way through senior and beyond. We deal with combination degree as well. So we dabble into the graduation coursework as well. So it's kind of all the things.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that question kind of comes back to one of the first comments I made about the advising model at the institution. Even when I was at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where we had kind of the split model, we were doing a lot of the advising support per se, but we were advising students through senior year, but we were not considered like the advisors of record in a sense. And so students weren't coming to us for those substantial questions and conversations about like research and graduate school. They were assigned a faculty advisor or a faculty mentor rather within their department to kind of have those more substantive conversations. But instead, we just, were able to answer questions maybe in their advisor's absence. What's the deadline to withdraw from classes? And so I definitely see how roles can change depending on the type of institution you're in and the model as it relates to your role at both a 2 and 4 year school.
And to your point, Tim, as well, within our college, again, the advisors do all of the academic advising piece. However, we do have specialty things like our wealth management minor and things like that. They do end up going to faculty just because
Nice.
of the holistic mass, I'm trying to think of the word. Everybody wants it. Everybody wants to get that minor. So because of the mass amount of students, we do have to have faculty advising for that.
Well, you all said something that was sort of unique, and I thought about advising assignments. Like, what was that like as far as the role of advising assignments when it comes to being in a 2 year institution or a 4 year institution, like how you are assigned a caseload?
So I'll say that whenever I was at the state college, it could vary. I may have maybe 500, 800, 1100 students, but sometimes that didn't necessarily mean that I saw every single one of them because of our department at the state college is that we had multiple advisors. So a student could be able to see any one of the advisors, but if they wanted to speak with their assigned advisor who had that advisement track, then they could be able to see them for the 2 year. Whereas for the 4 year, I have close to around 400 students right now, and they have to see me to be able to get their advising hold lifted and everything. And so that's honestly, that's what we're doing right now in the midst of registration coming soon, is that a lot of the students are now coming to be able to see me. But that's a priority in terms of, just of seeing of the difference between a 2 year institution and then a 4 year institution, of where students in the 4 year, they have to see you, as opposed to students in a 2 year where they can be able to see the first available advisor.
Yeah, I definitely noticed a difference in my advising assignments. And I think it's because my career path actually was kind of like advising adjacent. So I started as an admissions recruiter with advising responsibilities. Then I was doing more of the student generalist role with advising responsibilities. And so it wasn't until I made it to the transfer receiving institution at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where I actually had like an advising caseload. But in those three places, it seems as if, to Shara's point, every student could have been mine at some point. So if I am available and they're coming in with a question, I work with those students. And the beauty of it is that you learn to be a bit of a generalist because you learn so much, you answer so many questions, you have to familiarize yourself with the curriculum. Now in a role as the dean of advising, I don't have a caseload, but when I started at Lafayette, I was responsible for both the junior and senior classes. And so small school, so about 700 students in each class max. And those students were not required to meet with me at that point because I'm not the advisor of record, but providing support to about 700 students is a lot. We're doing a lot of outreach, registration, and things like that. So I can certainly see how even the assignments can vary. depending on the role in the institution.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that as well. And as far as caseloads go specifically, um, those are very unique because what's interesting about that, and Shara made a good point as well, is we don't necessarily meet with all of them specifically. So the advising style is different compared to 2-year versus 4-year as far as how you reach out to your caseload and what you're reaching out to them for and what those touch points are, because you want to make your communication very strategic. So that way you are reaching your audience at a peak time before that advanced registration period begins, et cetera. But Shara mentioned something also very important about the majors, or the tracks rather, through the AA, because you're that generalist, but you also have to know what those transfer requirements are for each of those majors and for each of those universities. So that can be very tricky because, as you know, information changes daily in higher ed, and we have to be as of the moment until something changes. So we have to, keep our eyes out for that and make sure we're giving the students the best advising. So that requires relationships across colleges, across universities, across, um, all the things when it comes to advising and just, having your network of people. The other important thing too is at the university level with majors is you're also technically a generalist, knowing, all the majors within the university, which there's a ton of them at UF, as we know, and other universities as well. But within your college, you are a specialist because you know what your requirements are and what you're advising students on. But it's also very important to have that jack of all, master of none kind of feeling, because they're going to come in and they're going to ask you lots of questions. They're going to say, well, I want to be for example, a chemical engineer. I was thinking about that, but now I want to go into finance. So tell me what those career aspects look like. And having that conversation is very different compared to, a 2-year college student coming in and not really understanding how the college environment works or, when they need to meet with their advisor, et cetera. So you can see there's definitely, just a huge difference when it comes to the models.
Yeah. I just want to jump in on what Kris kind of talked about with working at 2-year colleges and having to know information beyond kind of your general area. Like communication is key. And so not only do you need to be familiar with changes in curriculum, or curricular rather, requirements, transfer requirements, but also career like practicum and placement requirements for the more practical programs like nursing. I can think about, they had like a mental health, like social work program that I kind of worked in at another institution. And so we have to interface with various departments to advise our students, as well as outside institutions as well, right? If you have a student that's looking to transfer to another institution, you're learning about that, employers. I mean, just the type of collaboration I think does vary much more broadly at the 2-year than it does at the 4-year, where you're kind of positioning them in the institution within itself at the 4-year college.
All right. Thank you all for that. So we're going to back a little bit and think about, you all's transition between, whether it's advising roles or advising adjacent roles or advising support roles. What unique challenges have you faced when transitioning between advising roles or advising adjacent roles into your colleges and for your institutions?
Well, I guess I can start on this one. I know Shar and I've had many conversations about this as we both worked at Santa Fe and then transitioned to UF about the same time. So it was a great honor to work at both institutions and have that experience together. But at the same time, we both, and I won't speak for Shara, but struggled a little bit, not only with the system that's in place and how to navigate that, and then be able to work with students from the different perspectives that we've already sort of covered, but really just being able to hit the ground running with that advising. I think that is difficult because it's not the same. It's 100%, in my view, not the same. Again, we're looking at different types of students that we're working with. They all have, we're human beings and we all have needs, but it's a matter of finding what those needs are, given the time that you have. For example, at Santa Fe, we were allowed to, they wanted you to be able to work with students in a quick manner because there was so many students to serve, and you had, multiple advisors, for example, on drop-in. But at the same time, if one advisor took an hour with that student, that would severely back up the other advisors. So it's a balance where you're trying to, meet those needs of all the things in the quick time that you have. Because the other key piece of that transition is helping. You got to remember, as advisors, we're dealing with the same questions over and over and over and over, typically, maybe just different aspects of the same question. But that student, that's the very first time they're setting foot in your office. So it's a balance of, how do I communicate in a professional way, a caring way, a supportive way, so that way the student knows that I'm their resource. They can come back to me for information and not feel that mad rush. Because you have to imagine, when students are walking into the advising office and they see 100 students waiting in line to meet an advisor, they're probably like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to see an advisor, and am I going to come back? That was the 2-year model. With the 4-year model, we have a unique system specifically, which is nice. I know many other advisors across UF use the same system, and maybe other universities too, but we use bookings, and it's great because students are aware. We communicate in advance. They know when the advance registration is. It's very streamlined, and it's helpful because we're communicating with students in advance, so they're not waiting, in line with 100 other students to see an advisor the same day. They're booking in advance. They have the flexibility to book their own appointments. And it's helpful for advisors too, because it gives us the opportunity to really prepare for those appointments in advance. The way we pose our questions on bookings as well, to, say, what are your needs? What are you looking for in this appointment? How can I help you? And, we also have, what's great about our specific department is our director helps us as advisors and sends out communication every advance registration period as well, to let students know, for all of the majors, here's recommended classes, here's all the things. So it kind of sets them up so they don't necessarily have to come see us unless it's really an important, question. So again, a big difference. But those are, some of the challenges I had to deal with, because I was used to kind of putting on that mom hat and really walking students through it, where at the 4-year level, it's not so much like that you have your occasional student here and there, but for the masses, it's not typically like that. So it was a balance for me.
Say, just like Kris, is that, putting on that different hats and everything, because working at, a state college, you could be able to potentially spend a little bit more time with them, depending on what you're trying to actually convey to them. But then sometimes when there is drop in and it's registration time, you may not be able to spend as much time with them. So those are some of the things. And then also of, helping students who have different academic backgrounds and certain needs of theirs, because you have some students who have an academic background where, they've done AP, they've excelled, and they just go straight through. Whereas then you have students who need to take developmental courses. And so now you're helping them kind of, have that foundation and now building themselves up so that then they can be competitive to, transfer to a 4-year university. And another thing that I would say that I had, issues with of when I transitioned to, say, like a 4-year, was of learning about the academic requirements and knowing about how, to me, I always have to think about it as like 3 levels. It's the department level, the college level, and then the university level. So sometimes it would make it feel like the department wanted to override the university, whereas we know that the university is it, at the top. And so just being able to understand those little nuances, that was something of a transition for me as well, of what I had a little bit of difficulty in. But I feel like it's going a lot better than what it was like in the beginning, because me and Kris know this, and Thomas, of being transitioned to UF, is that we have to take these assessments to give us security roles and access. And while the assessments help us to be able to get those security roles. In the same vein, they don't actively teach us later when we actually have to do it, so now we have to go backwards and try and find all of that information. Whereas, that's something that hopefully in the future for UF, I would hope that they would do, is to actually have more value in academic advising, of being able to better prepare their advisors for that transition and everything.
Wow. Yeah. Ditto comments as always. I'm glad the synergy is just great here. And want to kind of jump off what Kris had mentioned early on. Like, yes, it's definitely not the same. It's, same role in terms of title, but in terms of responsibilities, definitely I see a lot of differences between the 2 and 4 year. I feel like for me, the most unique challenge that I faced really was my advising approach. And I know we use these broad terms like prescriptive advising versus developmental, but I can certainly see myself as a more using a prescriptive approach working with the 2 year students, right? Here's what you need. This will get you from point A to point B. The transferring out was the goal. And there was pretty much, well, I mean, once you've done that, like there's nothing else to do. But now moving over to the transfer receiving institution in 4 year, we're now working with students who are transferring in. So it is like the what next. So like now that you're here, how do we help you navigate the rest of your college or educational experience? And now I'm using more of the developmental approach. I'm asking, okay, well, you've done this here at XYZ school. What do you hope to do here? And so those conversations were remarkably different when I moved over to the 4 year college and university. And now, even in this role, we see that the conversations are more about graduating the student versus like the moving out completely. So it's the graduate school, it's the medical school, it's the research opportunities, it's jobs. And those conversations are also different between both institutions. So definitely notice a difference, but I think that my approach was the presented the biggest challenge for me.
Well, something that we all like within advising is in higher education is technology. Please tell me how you adjusted when it came to using different software or learning the technology, because that sometimes can pose a challenge when you are transitioning, whether it's from a 2 year institution to a 4 year institution or just transitioning from institution to institution. What was that transition like when it came to utilizing technology?
I will say that whenever I transitioned from a 2 year to a 4 year, it actually opened up more opportunity for me to know more technology. I can tell you right now that Qualtrics and DocuSign are my friends. Because they have helped, of me being able to sit there and streamline certain advising processes. Before, we would have students come in with an actual, paper document to want to sign something and get it signed. And they had to go all around campus to try and get a faculty to sign the research form. Whereas now I've made it as a DocuSign, where it's a DocuSign power form where they just put in their name, put in the information, and it sends to the people to get signed. It comes back to me and I register them for the classes. The same is for advanced registration. I have an advanced registration Qualtrics where I have students, fill out the information, put in their curriculum plan. As long as the curriculum plan is good, they get their advising hold lifted. So that's my other way of being able to serve, 400 plus students and stuff, of being able to do it that way. So I can feel like I have more time, so I don't feel burnt out of actually having to see each and every one of them, but I'm seeing them through another form of communication.
Yeah, and I would
Yeah.
say the same. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
Nope. After you.
I would say the same with Shaura. I would say PDF has become my friend just because of the different uses that it offers and the way you can formally sign documents and save them, and then have that official communication with students. Also, particularly in our department, we manage projects. We have different projects that we manage, and I use a platform called Gravity Forms or WordPress. It's a really great system, and it's a way for us to manage all the incoming major changers. So it's a great way to streamline and make the system a lot easier. But that's something that you couldn't necessarily work on or do as a new advisor, even as an experienced advisor coming from a 2-year institution, because you're learning all new systems as a whole. So to the question of, is it challenging? Absolutely. But as Shaura said, it's also, a good thing, because you're, really, opening yourself up to more communication with the technology and how you can work with students. But like anything, you just navigate the pluses and the minuses as a whole. But I will say the different systems, you'd like to take one from this system and another from this system and make your own system, but of course we don't have that opportunity to.
That's exactly what I was going to say in a sense. We know that there's going to be a learning curve for anyone transitioning from an institution, new job. And we can certainly look at it as a challenge, but it's definitely, looked at as an opportunity. So now you're learning more than one system. So whether it's Qualtrics, DocuSign, Adobe PDF Maker, the booking software for appointments, our CRMs, ways that we can keep advising notes, I have been able to determine or look at certain platforms and say, wow, at XYZ institution, it was like this. This was so smooth. And then kind of point out where there are gaps. And perhaps, depending on your role, you can advocate for investment for additional bundles for software programs. And so maybe we can add something, or perhaps encourage administration to consider a new platform. And so that's been super valuable in kind of transitioning from place to place. I have not seen any differences in terms of institutional type. It just seems like they're going with whatever was affordable and convenient for the time being. But I see banner schools, I see, Lucian, PeopleSoft, like those schools, they vary. Both 2 and 4-year programs use those, but it really is how they manage it all. I think that determines how we navigate the rest of the technology.
Thank you for that. Um, how have you seen the role of an advisor evolve across the 2-year institution and the 4-year institution? And what do you think the future of advising holds in both environments?
I'll jump in on that one. And it's very interesting kind of looking at it now, being at an institution with a faculty advising model that appreciates the professional support that advisors can give them, but also being at a place at a 2-year college that was more centralized, but would also benefit from having faculty have more of a hands-on approach with their students. I see that the role of the advisor is probably going to combine both aspects in the near future, because we're realizing that there are differences between the two in terms of scope, but as well as relationships. And I know that there are some students at the community college who are, who would benefit from having a faculty member or someone within their field advise them and help them make meaning of their education. And then there's some students at the 4-year school who saying, hey, I just have a couple of questions. And, I think that I have an idea where I need to go here. And, perhaps I don't need to make an appointment with my faculty advisor because they're, working on a major project, but I can connect with the, advising office to discuss these things here. So I certainly see conversations, or been part of conversations, not necessarily just at Lafayette, but at other places where they are considering looking at various models of advising to meet the needs of the students, because they're changing as well.
Well, I guess, I mean, for me, just, it's definitely an involvement. It's, as we've already touched on, it's just not the same role. I think for a brand new advisor, I will say this, someone who's never advised before and they come into the advising role in a 4-year institution, that's, in my opinion, humble opinion, I think that would be a lot more challenging, just because of all the things that they're navigating compared to starting at a state college level. Not that it's easier, but it allows you to connect with students a lot more. So that involvement piece across the 2 settings, that's a big piece. And then also, like you mentioned already, Thomas, about the technology, because there's multiple things you're juggling with technology more in a 4-year setting compared to a 2-year setting. I've worked in multiple 2-year settings. So not that you're not using a lot of technology, but I would just say that, it's not as prevalent or necessary for the type of role you're doing in it as an advisor, but other advisors that have, more unique roles may be using more technology. As far as the future of advising, I think, well, I'll say this first. I think being in a four-year institution has evolved me greatly personally, interpersonally, professionally, because it's allowed me to really hone in on all of the skills I've learned over the years in the different advising settings. And I mean, while we're never perfect or, even close to that, but at the same time, I think in the role itself, we become more, um, streamlined for an advisor because we're efficient. That's really the word that I'm getting at. Because we've learned, how to navigate a student very quickly just based on the developmental theories and all the theories, and then of course knowing what their needs are, being able to speak to those needs, and knowing which technology you do need to use and under the advising model that you're using within that office, and really how to kind of help the students. So in other words, compared to the 2-year model, like I said, I use the example of a drop-in advising. If there's one advisor on the whole team with that model that is spending more time with a student, and you need to get them in and out because you've got to handle the masses. It's so much different at the 4-year level because you're able to do that. I look at my surveys from my students. I always, because we survey every student after the the session, and I tell them when they walk in, I'm like, you're going to have an amazing appointment today. We only have 10 minutes, but let's get to it. Let's get to the need of what I can help you with. And I've had so many comments on those surveys of, oh, Kris was great. She helped me with my stress and she was able to do all my questions in 10 minutes, because as we know, students always wait until the advanced registration period or the registration period to come and see their advisor. And they always hold all the things that they want to discuss. So in other words, they're not coming to us when that hold initially goes on, or they have a petition that they need to submit, or they're unclear about what their next semester schedule should be. They're not thinking about all that until the registrar hits that button in their student portal that says, hey, your registration is coming up, you better get in there and get your classes registered. That's when it's like, oh, light bulb, I better go see my advisor. So all those things is what we learn to navigate very quickly and efficiently. So really, that's how this role has helped me. I feel it's made me more efficient. I feel way more confident than ever as far as being able to handle the multiple questions that come at you and being able to answer those effectively and with the best knowledge possible, and be able to direct them to the resources that they need if I don't know the answer.
Just like how Kris said, is that what I take from being at a 4-year institution now is being more effective and being okay to say, I don't know, to a student, especially if there's something that they have a question about and I have maybe never heard of it before. And I say, well, let's try and find it out together, or let me get in contact with somebody who may have the answer, or at least get us to the right contact. When I think about the state college, I think about, you're just pretty much getting your feet wet in terms of stuff of trying to have that building block before you go to a 4-year institution. And I could say for me is that every advising department is different depending on what department in college they're under. So for me, I'm the primary contact for most things, even if it's sometimes a little bit out of the advising scope. Most of the students think to come to me, and sometimes I have to sit there and go, wait, I'm the contact for that? I didn't know, and so now I have to go and figure out what is this all about. But I will say is that even though sometimes there are certain things that might be given to me, I do have the ability to go and ask and say, what is this about? So that then later I start making out, handouts for myself, so that then I can be able to learn a process and be able to help anyone else that may end up transitioning into our department, whether it's another advisor, whether it's advising leadership, anything along those lines, because now I'm able to use all of the information that I got from a scenario or a situation and then be able to impart that to them. Like I legitimately just did that yesterday with one of our advising leaderships because they just needed to know a background of something. And I'm like, here's this PDF, of all the information.
And when we talk about how our roles are shifting or evolving, Shaura, it's just that, and Kris, it's just that, right? They say advising, but I think we have to, even as a discipline, keep trying to define what an academic advisor is, because we are doing so much, in our daily work, right? And it's not just helping a student select classes. It's not just helping a student make meaning of their educational experience. There are some counseling aspects, there's financial aid aspects, there's admissions aspects, there's the graduate school aspect, there's the career aspect, there's the personal aspect of all of those things. And I feel like that our roles are evolving into that kind of like larger big picture of kind of like what an advisor is. And that's definitely something, maybe another conversation for another day, but like advising and is kind of like what we do. But hearing Kris talk about technology a bit also kind of begs the question about like how AI might impact the role of the advisors evolving role. And again, that's another conversation, another panel for another day. But I mean, I just think about students wanting information right away, right? Quick information right away. Who can I ask? If I can't get into someone, how do I do it? If I need more than 10 minutes, where do I go? And I certainly see that might be another direction, or something that we're going to have to grapple with as we move into the future.
Here's something that you all sort of indirectly touched on. Um, when I say the word autonomy, how do you think about that when it comes to the 2-year setting versus the 4-year setting? Because based on some information that was provided and depending upon the role that you have now, it seems like you all have a little bit more autonomy based on your current role or based on what you're doing, whether it is directly advising or administrative tasks.
Yes. So for me, I feel that I have more autonomy being in a 4-year institution than what I did in a 2-year institution. Even though, don't get me wrong, I loved being a part of a team, because we could all be able to help each other out. But I also know that if I have some task that I have to complete, that I know that I'm the one responsible for it and that it needs to be efficient, it needs to be done. And I'm not waiting for somebody at the last minute to be able to, chip in or anything along those lines. So I do like being able to have more of the autonomy at a 4-year institution because I think it also opens the door for growth. And also it shows, if you were to go to, say, a different college, a different department, what have you, it also shows to them of how dedicated that you are in terms of student success and everything as well.
Yeah, and I will piggyback off that as well, Shaura. Particularly in our roles as advisors, we teach our Warrington Welcome course, which is our first-year experience for students, which I suspect many of the colleges do that. But particularly we work with peer leaders, which is our students. So having the opportunity to really lead and co-lead and work with students on that level is a leadership role in itself. In addition to that, we also have individual unique projects among our advisors, which we manage and control basically. We work with our, associate directors and we get, we work with them in the leadership team, but we get to manage those projects. It's great opportunities for growth. Our model as a whole, we have an awesome dean, we have an awesome college, we have an awesome everything, but the culture is specifically for you create your role as an advisor. Yes, you have the duties and roles and responsibilities that you have to administer, and the tasks and things like that, but you get the opportunity to really lead. And that is also including among your team. So as an example, I mentioned before that, I work specifically with major change students. I solicited our team. I held a meeting, I had a Teams chat. I wanted to see what's working, what the team thought about our eligibility criteria, et cetera, and, what all that, looks like and what their thoughts and things are. So as a team, we voted, and then we work with leadership on making sure that those changes go into effect. So it's a great opportunity from multiple perspectives to grow as an advisor, and really allow you to think about what you want as a career. Do you want to stay in advising as a career? Do you want to move up? Do you want to, do different types of opportunities? So it's great because it allows us, that opportunity. So to your point and question, Thomas, about the 2-year versus 4-year, I did have that opportunity at one of the 2-year institutions I work for as well, but just on a different level. But then at the other 2-year institution, I did not have that opportunity. So, it depends, I think, where you work, what their model is. I think, as Shaura touched on too. But it's definitely a big difference here for me, and I definitely have a lot of autonomy.
Yeah, I agree. I always say that it depends. It depends on the person's role, depends on the program and the structure of the administration and the institution. And so, whereas I believe in all aspects of my role as advisor, even from being on the front line to being in administration, I felt like I was able to exercise a bit of autonomy in terms of how I connected with students. However, in terms of like how I advise them or what I advise them on, it was more structured based on the program. Engineering, nursing, those programs are so prescribed. I didn't really have much autonomy in terms of, changing or helping students explore the curriculum as much as I would, let's say, at a liberal arts institution where that is the goal for students to kind of look at all areas of the common course of study. I'm looking at the structure and how we can perhaps impact practice versus policy. You know, um, for a while, we had like walk-ins, right? And do we now go to a system where every student must set an appointment? And is that something that we can exercise across the institution? That is something that depends on your role at the institution. And policy, more specifically, great repeat policy, commencement policy, withdrawals, like all of those things in terms of like how you can kind of change or navigate certainly depends on your role. And I think the last example is about like our role in orientation and even in assessment. Um, at institutions that I've been in, advising was under enrollment management. So it was a great partnership there where advising was a huge part of the orientation program, and we had autonomy to figure out how we were going to bring advising into orientation. Then being at an institution where advising is part of the academic division and orientation is being housed as a student life, it's different. So the partnership changes. And so we have to kind of work a little bit differently to figure out how we can make advising become an element of the orientation program. I like to say that my team, I allow them to use their own practices, but it's really it changes based on the institution in terms of like how far you can go with that outside of just advising.
And I want to say
Um,
one more point, Tim, about students. They also have autonomy as well, with the systems that we use for technology with bookings, which is great because they don't have to call a front desk person. They don't have to, try to schedule. It's very easy. They just go onto your bookings link, they see what your availability is, and they schedule it. So from that end as well, students have really enjoyed that autonomy as well. So it's a win-win.
And they also get a chance in some cases to maybe connect with an advisor that they want to meet with, right? So they can see your booking and they can say, hey, I really connected with Kris. I want to connect, move forward with Kris. And then some of the areas where advisors are assigned, in some cases, students don't have the autonomy to just go to anybody, right? You are going to the advisor who is the specialist or kind of the advisor of record in your area. So that kind of gives that other side of it.
Absolutely.
um, just thinking about something from a personal perspective, what specific skills have you developed over the years that have helped you succeed in both settings when you sort of put both settings side by side?
I would say for me is to have written and verbal communication skills, of having better of them, because sometimes when you do talk to, whether it's students, administration, what have you, being able to definitely make sure that you're understanding or having them understand of where you're coming from or explaining something is very important. Also, being proficient in technology or being open to learning new technology, that's also helped me. Organization and time management. I can tell you right now of just, being in a four-year institution and having additional duties on top of academic advising, I have to always try and figure out how can I be able to get this done in a certain amount of time, and how can I organize my day so that I can be the most efficient during that time period. And then I would say, building rapport. I think that's very important, of building rapport with students, building rapport with your colleagues, faculty, so that then they can understand of who you are as a person, but also understand of who you are as a professional as well. So I feel like those things have helped me in terms of adapting from a 2-year institution into a 4-year institution.
I'll go ahead, I guess, Tim. I was going to say all the things Shaura said too, but also really just leadership. I think as an entry-level advisor, when you begin this profession, it's a different mindset. It's a different, and again, depending on the institution and what the roles and responsibilities are, it's the model, but leadership, because again, in our roles, we're not treated as you sit there from 8 to 5 or whatever and take your hour lunch and you're monitored. It's you're a professional. You have advanced degrees. You have a mindset. You know what you're doing. I mean, our office is big on culture and making sure that we hire on merit. We hire on advisors that can bring those skills and qualifications to the role, but also expand that to our students and be those leaders for students. Because again, we're one of the top business schools, in the country. And with that comes great responsibility, along with our world-renowned faculty. So, we may have not majored in business ourselves, but we carry a lot of those just skills as to what the industry knowledge brings. And we communicate that with our students. We interact with our students. I've been a student advisor for an organization, and also taught with our peer leaders, things like that. So there's lots of multiple things, and led different projects among the team. So it's a great opportunity to really develop yourself and to change your mindset and build that confidence level. I think that's a key piece, because I think sometimes advisors, and this is just being in the business for a long time and working with other advisors, they may not feel there's advanced opportunities or roles that they can move into beyond an advising role, but there are. A lot of us, though, me in particular, I love advising. I love the student face time that I get with them. I like being able to interact with them and change lives. I like meeting students where they are and not use these buzzwords to just say it. It's true. Like when they come in my office, I want to remember, oh, we talked about that student organization you were in, and you were going to be rushing, during that time. How did that go? Did you get in? Things like that. You want to build those rapports with the students and, really build that involvement. So, there's lots of things, but those are probably my top ones.
Yeah, and if I could kind of think, my top three, certainly skills that I've learned over the time that has helped me in both settings: reading the catalog, and interpreting policy in curriculum is the best way, and I think that has certainly helped me in terms of figuring out how I can advise students with the most accurate information. Understanding the mission, I think, has also been super helpful, and looking for opportunities for leadership. So, like Kris mentioned, I had a very, I would say, linear progression throughout my career, but I think it's because I actually sought out those opportunities, especially when I was able to identify problems in practice at the institution, and being able to make suggestions to my supervisor and being able to run with that. I think has been super rewarding for me. And I think while doing that, learning a bit more about the structure of the academic program in the institution has helped me. But also the fact that no student is the same. That is the biggest skill that anyone can learn. They say a student is a student is a student. Dr. Karen Archambault said that to me when I first started at Brookdale Community College, and she's right. And I am now at an institution where the average age, 19, 20, but I've been at institutions where, the age can change to like 50 and 60. But a student is a student, and their situations are different. We'll never have the same two. And I think once we recognize that, it kind of helps us in terms of how we help other students, no matter where we are.
All right, I have a few more questions and then we will end today's session. So the second to last question is, how do you collaborate with colleagues across different advising structures when you think about your time in a 2-year institution versus a 4-year institution, and what have you learned from these collaborations?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I think in my role now, since I'm not directly advising students, I my role is to basically collaborate with various divisions across campus. But I'll maybe go back to where I was at Hudson and Brookdale Community College. Um, Collaboration has been not as challenging as I probably would have expected it to be, but I think it's because of the culture of the institution in which I've worked, where everybody had the goal of working with a student. And as it related to like financial aid, if I didn't have the answer, I would be able to reach out to the financial aid office. If it was related to accessibility services, I didn't have the answer, I was able to kind of connect with someone there. I think establishing relationships with colleagues at the institution is super important because you always have that one person that you can call on. But I think business continuity is also important if in the event that that person isn't there, but that you aren't there to answer the question. And so I feel like collaboration definitely takes a group effort, but kind of identifying at what points will you need to kind of connect with another office. Communication is also key. So when there are changes happening within your area, sharing that out has been helpful, as other departments will do the same.
I would also
Does that
say, I would also say of being able to collaborate with colleagues is that you can be able to collaborate them, doing professional development, attending conferences. I find that sometimes, especially when attending conferences, is that you find a lot of advisors, or advisor adjacent roles alike. And then you end up finding out that you have some of the same pain points at times, and we end up talking with each other so that then we can be able to get ideas about how can we better assist our students in the end, because of course our common goal is student success, and how can we be able to get them prepared for graduation. So I feel like being able to collaborate with, either colleagues inside of your institution or even outside of your institution and getting different perspectives is very beneficial.
I would agree with everything Tim and Shara said as well, and maybe just add that I think it's important too to reach out to other colleges within the university. Even if you don't have necessarily anything direct you're working with that college, but just getting to know the other advisors, especially when questions come up about, oh, how does your college sub a course or something like that when it relates to your student or something. So just, meeting with the other advisors and just getting to know them. That way they can put a name with a face, and attending events, and just, I'll say within our college specifically, like the student organizations and things like that, because we have so many events all the time. It's so great to get out. You do tend to forget there are other colleges that you can, interact with. So it's good to kind of see what other college events are doing and maybe attending those workshops, things like that, and just being able to, you know, um, just reach out. So, for example, too, I had a major change student, just to use that as an example, and they were going through College of Liberal Arts and Science. Well, I needed to figure out if that student was admitted to their college specifically or to UF as a whole. So I reached out to one of the associate directors, never interacted with them before, introduced myself on Teams, and we had a great conversation. And now we've connected. So it's just simple things like that of, just taking the initiative to reach out, and, offering, a name with a face, and, saying, hey, I'll see you at the UAC event this year, the conference, as Shara mentioned, things like that. So I think it's just important to interact and just really, introduce yourself.
Something to follow up on what you all were talking about. Um, when you think about collaboration, has that changed based on the environmental setting, whether it's being in a 2-year or a 4-year, or is it sort of the same?
I think it's changed, at least for me, a little bit because of the fact that me being able to talk to different colleagues, whether they're in different departments of engineering or outside of the College of Engineering, anything along those lines, that has been able to help me see different perspectives and how to do stuff differently. Because, if I probably would have been in the 2-year setting, sometimes in a 2-year setting, it's something like across the board of how everybody does certain things across the board. Whereas if I all of a sudden decide to go to College of Business or College of Education or College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, then I have different perspectives of how they do stuff. And maybe they're actually teaching me maybe the correct way, of how to do something and navigate it. Or I end up teaching them something that they may have not been aware of, because I do have sometimes some people from different colleges that reach out to me and they're just like, oh, we heard that you have a Canvas course for your students and everything. Like, how did you go about getting it? Could I have access to it? So those types of things of being able to collaborate and have partnerships with each other, I feel has been more advantageous to me at a 4-year institution.
I would agree with that. I would say more at the 2-year institution. For the last institution I was at, there wasn't a lot of collaboration just because the role was very specific and it was more geared toward the advising piece specifically. There may be times where you would reach out to faculty about a question or something like that, but in general, there wasn't a lot of reach out. There were some, but at the 4-year institution, it's 100% open. It's definitely engaging. It's definitely a different experience. It's definitely something that allows you, again, to put that autonomy in your day and that leadership hat on and be able to really kind of navigate, your role as an advisor and how do you want your role to be. You get to create it. So, there's lots of perspectives here and lots of things we're probably missing in this conversation, but just basically what Shaura said is I felt a little more, I guess kind of in a box at the 2-year institution compared to here is all I'm saying. I'm not saying that you couldn't reach out. It was just that it wasn't necessarily necessary because of the role.
Yeah. I mean, and you all said it best. And I guess to summarize it, it depends on the role. It depends on the institution, where advising sits. I feel like, again, I've had wonderful collaboration experiences at all institutions where I've been. I think that the level of collaboration changes based on where the advising program sits in the institution. So orientation, enrollment management, student life, is it academic affairs, student affairs? I think that determines kind of how we collaborate on larger policy and even programming. But I do say that, to Shaura and Kris's point, at a larger institution where there are different schools and divisions and academic advising can kind of take on its own lens, for the lack of words, I think you definitely have more opportunities to collaborate, to learn best practices across those areas. Whereas if it's more centralized, or maybe at a smaller institution such as my own, I think we can certainly collaborate across departments, right? Engineering can kind of connect with chemistry, chemistry can, connect with anthropology and sociology. But I think that some of these larger 4-year public institutions, or even larger private institutions that have different schools that have their own advising programs, allow for more collaboration across best practices as it relates to how they connect with their students.
And then here's just a final question to wrap up today's wonderful conversation. What advice would you give to advising professionals who are considering moving between 2-year colleges and 4-year universities or 4-year institutions in their careers?
I would say that the advice that I would give for advising professionals is to build a strong network of colleagues, ask many questions, understand that not every policy and procedure in the institution is the same, and to give yourself grace during the transition, because sometimes learning new avenues of policies and procedures and everything, it can be a little bit overwhelming. I can say that personally for me, when I transitioned to a 4-year institution, is that I was used to at a 2-year institution knowing pretty much everything. People always came to me. And for almost the first time of transitioning to a 4-year, I was like, I don't know. I don't know. So I had to learn to give myself grace. And then also I had a strong network of colleagues that I could be able to go to, and they could tell me, you're doing fine. It's just going to take time. Some of them will sit there and tell me, I've been here for over 10 years and I've never heard of what you just told me about before in a scenario. So I'm like, okay, I'm not doing so bad. Like month 6 in, I'm not doing so bad, So I would just say one of my biggest things is to give yourself grace and give you time to learn. And every time that you learn, it's a win.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree with all that as well. And just really to add to it, knowing what your personal strengths and weaknesses are, and thinking about the fact that you are interacting with a student that you can make or break their experience. Um, students sometimes are scared to come and talk to us. So knowing that you can really interact with that student at a level that engages them, or you can de-engage them and make them run away. So it's really important to know what your strengths and weaknesses are so you can work with that when working with students. It's not always easy because, as we know, people have different personalities, different perspectives, and then of course all the theories that we're working with, and then knowing the time constraints, but really just, thinking about who you are as a person and how that role fits in with who you are and how you want to navigate that. There isn't a one size fits all model for it, I feel, because as we've talked about throughout this session, it's just, it's navigating all the things, because there's so many things we haven't even touched on today, but just knowing that it just comes down to students are people and you're a person. So those personalities you just gotta work with and knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are.
And you've probably heard me say it several times in this conversation, but it always depends, right? To Kris's point, there's no one size fits all. Institutions aren't the same, even if they're within the same type of student population, right? So no 2-year colleges are the same. No 2 4-year colleges are the same. We have HBCUs, we have religious affiliated institutions, we have liberal arts colleges. And so you do have to think about your own mission within higher education and how it aligns with your own goals and values and what is the fit for you, right? And when you're looking at applying to different institutions, depending on whether it's going from 2 to 4-year, you have to be able to explain to the hiring committees how you can use your experience to kind of help the overall big picture. Students are not the same as well, right? But they are still students. And so you're able to kind of use those experience across the board to think about how you can kind of help. But I do think that you have to have some knowledge of the institution that you're planning to apply to or that you're planning to work at. And if you don't have the experience, think of ways that you can build that network that Shaura talked about. Go to the conferences, make some connections, visit some of those places, do some reading and learning, because ultimately you have to be able to show that you are marketable regardless of the institution that you decide to be a part of and share your talents with.
Well, you all, I want to thank you all for today's insightful conversation about your experiences of working in 2-year institutions and 4-year institutions. It was a wonderful conversation to have, and I look forward to chatting with you guys in the near future.
Thank you so much.